Good afternoon. On behalf of Telecom Radio colleagues, I welcome and thank you for being with us at this time. Good news that we have excellent panelists and they will discuss a great topic. Bad news, guys, we have 30 minutes as the request of the organizers. So today, first, I welcome you and thank you for being with us. This panel will discuss how technology lead the battle of COVID-19. So we're talking about the technology advancements and its role in combating the COVID-19. And we'll take a look on the trends that we should keep eye on and that will impact us, such the e-health. So without further ado, let's get starting. My first question to our friend Jawad. Jawad, coming from mobile industry, and what is the mobile industry main recommendation to governments in such situation?
Well, the pandemic, the global pandemic, has clearly shown that the most fundamental connectivity platform globally is the mobile industry, is the mobile platform. When everything stopped and we had to move for online teleworking, online education, even online health, and so on. So the viability of the mobile broadband networks is vital, and the pandemic has shown how vital it should be. So how vital it is, I mean. So what the industry recommends is, first, an appreciation that the mobile broadband networks that we all started using excessively after the pandemic did not just happen. They are the culmination of massive investments, of massive hours, of massive human resources put in place by a multitude of operators. So this is not something that naturally occurred. It actually is decades of investments by the mobile operators, and therefore we need to maintain the incentives to continue to invest in that. What the governments need to do also is realize that extra demand on the networks does not necessarily mean extra revenues or higher profitability. On the flip side, actually, it could mean more costs without extra revenues, because if people had a package of 30 gigabytes and they used to use only 10 or 15 or 20, during the pandemic, they started using the full 30 without extra revenues to the operators. So what the governments need to look at is look at the success stories of where the networks were most robust and adopt the policies of these, such as, for example, making sure that spectrum is available, not artificially inflated for costing the spectrum, and also operators are able to invest in their own backhaul or have it a competitive market without monopolies, and of course, making sure that the industry is taxed fairly without excessive burden on it. So all of that will help the industry to continue to invest and continue to be the main connectivity platform. Because remember, of the 7 billion plus people in the world, more than 5 billion are mobile users, and more than half of that are mobile broadband users.
Thank you, Jawad. This is one side of the coin. So I will. My question is for Jihad. Jihad, as a digital transformation catalyst in the Middle East region, how digital infrastructure increases the social and economic resilience in such situation?
Thank you very much for your question, and thank you for hosting me today. I'll start by where Jawad closed. I mean, definitely mobile networks are extremely important, but I'll add a little bit. I mean, it's beyond mobile. It's general broadband connectivity as well, and all the cloud infrastructure, all the digital infrastructure that's there, that's available, that helped us navigate through that pandemic, if I may. So from a resilience perspective, one cannot but salute what happened in the UAE. Really, it was the way we battled the pandemic was really amazing. So businesses were, most of them, still operational. Schools are all open, and there was almost no disruption in terms of the online learning. all of us as well, from a resilience perspective, we saw how training, the fitness industry moved into the online and the virtual classes. So all of that was available, and technology really helped in this sense. It helped because the infrastructure was there, but it helped because the connectivity was there, because the mobile broadband infrastructure was there, because the virtual conferencing was there. Now, a question to Etisalat, I mean, if someone is there and we can discuss, will Teams still be available, Teams and WebEx? And this is really a very, very important lesson learned from a resiliency perspective. This type of discussion needs to still happen after we finally all go back to, go back to normal or not go back to the new normal. That's the never-ending debate. But really, this type of discussion has to happen between the Telecom Regulatory Authority, between between Etisalat, because it was really key and essential from a resiliency perspective. As a quick example of how it was business and the economy was still happening, you know the joke when they say COVID-19 fast-tracked your digital transformation of organization. Well, COVID-19 fast-tracked one of our major contracts with the Ministry of Health. We were stuck at home when the discussion with the Ministry of Health was fast-tracked, was pushed, where we got the award to build one of the very ambitious programs in the country, which is the track and trace project, which is called the Tatmin. It's a track and trace for all pharma and medicines across the UAE. So we'll be building a platform to track all the medicine for counterfeit from manufacturing all the way to the end user.
Thanks, Jihad, for this very interesting points, and I will get back to the collaboration and public-private partnership later. But I'm going now to Hazem. He is online with us. So, Hazem, we heard a lot this morning about digital transformation. How digital transformation will shape the urban development and services?
So what's happening is a lot of these urban services are going to be, transformed even faster because of COVID. A lot of the cities, basically around the world, they're going to have to put in place all the mechanisms to start sensing, basically, the next shock or the next pandemic. It's not only going to be about responding and recovering, but they are going to have to start using data, predictive analytics, and all of that to be able to run the city in multi-modes. And then when you talk about some of the future services, like for example, mobility as a service, it's not going to be uncommon when you're making your decision in a city about which mode of transport or combination of modes to use, that you have the data at your fingertips that would allow you to compare time, cost, impact on the environment, and also degree to exposure to disease, like COVID or any other future possible diseases. So a lot of the services at the city level, the urban services, are going to be really based on an increased number of connectivity, sensors, data analytics, and that would allow us to be able to make these conscious decisions in education, in waste management, in mobility. All of these services, as cities will have to be able to flex between a purely virtual mode when there is an issue or a pandemic, and a blended mode between the physical and the digital as we are living today.
Thank you so much for this, Hazem. And this takes us to the collaboration or partnership. When we talk about urban development and smart cities, we talk about collaboration between private sector and governments. So my question to Yusuf, how you see the approach, the best approach between governments and the private sector to deploy this frontier technology to support the public services?
Yeah, so the approach has been always, of course, collaboration. I mean, the government has always executed projects through the private sector. You rarely hear of a company that's owned by the government doing the work for the government. But what has happened is what Jihad said, is this acceleration, the fast tracking, put some conditions around this partnership. Because what happened, those panic attacks that happened, government not ready with the infrastructure, not ready with the data, with the connectivity, with the applications, reached out really in a panic mood to the private sector saying, show us what you have. We need tracing applications, we need monitoring for drugs, we need remote patient monitoring, we need e-prescription. So there was a shopping spree for a while, and then they realized that the only way that it can be done is through partnership. So you guys do it, let's monetize together this. Don't ask me immediately for a revenue model. We will figure out a business model for that. And I guess companies who adapted to that won. And companies who insisted on an old way of doing business, the tendering process or show me the budget or pay in advance, they couldn't. Now, the beauty in a way of what happened with the pandemic is that technology became a lifeline. Digitization became a lifeline, no longer a luxury. And governments woke up to that at all levels and felt that, okay, so now we actually can use technology to save lives. We can use technology to prevent the spread of certain diseases. We can also use the technology to make sure people stay safe after they're healed. And that put different models of collaboration that never existed, in my opinion, at least in this part of the world.
Thanks for this, Youssef. I will go back online. We have Dr. Ibrahim with us. So before we go and collaborate and do this partnership with the governments, how organizations should be prepared and have a digital plan resiliency to have a successful digital transformation? Dr. Ibrahim, my question for you.
Thank you. Good morning, and sorry I can't be with you guys live. It looks physically distant, but pretty cool to be in the same location. I just want to start off. I will talk a bit about what Jihad said, which is very critical, I think, and Hazem touched on it, and I will disagree with Jawad in a second, but...
Good.
Thanks, Brian.
What about me?
Let me talk about the Canadian perspective, right? Like, mobile actually did not grow for us because we have pretty good wireline networks. But what happened is everybody's wirelessly connected. It's just the mobility part, because maybe here was downtown, offices, highways. People were not traveling, people were not at the office. But we did see almost a 4x growth on broadband from the home on that part. So I agree with everything Jawad said, like we need proper spectrum, we need all that. It's just what we realized is everybody actually was connected somehow, and the biggest challenge we had was the interconnectivity between telcos, because a lot of it was TDM and legacy, and yet there was the governments. So back to the original question, what are they not doing? I think they're doing everything they can with what they've got, but they're not thinking digital. So back to what Jihad said, what was very clear in Canada, I'm probably going to get shit from my minister right after this panel session, since it's 6 a.m. my time and 8 a.m. this time. But as soon as they said to fight the pandemic, if you have an unemployment problem, call this number. If you have any issues, call this other number. So what was very clear is as we launched contact tracing and apps, all the governments narrowed down not on a digital interface or a digital supply chain. They actually stuck back with calling phone numbers, and then the solution was twofold. One is to hire more people answering phones, but the other one is more people on the back end to do manual contact tracing. So two things. I think what this has proven to us from a health point of view and whatnot is I think we're not digital. Having a digital front end is not enough. You need to look at the end-to-end supply chain. And yes, I would take a small example of education, which you guys didn't talk about, which is very critical, because as our kids are at home getting frustrated, they can't play. In Canada, it's hockey, it's football, and UAE. The teachers just said, oh, well, this is your homework. That's not online teaching. That is not an immersive experience. You just threw the kids' homework, who's 10 years old and 15 years old, on an email interface. So I think what this clearly displayed to us as individuals and as nations is we do need to leverage it as an opportunity for an immersive digital experience. And I'm not talking about virtual reality and augmented reality, but more about what we need to do together to work. So my urge to the government is stop trying to worry about the friggin' internet and how to monitor it. It's done. It's a 1960s construct that boomed in the 1990s and we're using it. Let's focus on how we work together on the new things. Sorry to, but I'm pretty passionate about the topic. And Jawad, love your point on spectrum, because I think in Canada I spend $1 billion a year on spectrum.
Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim. Surely we are living in a new normal, and things are changing, and we need to adapt with this. We need to cope with this. So I believe you have a good point there, and I believe Jawad has a good point from the mobile perspective, same as Jihad. So it's a convergence between all these sectors with the government efforts and policy and regulation. We'll go back to regulation later. My question will be to Mr. Dimitris. STC is relying on a frontline technologies like Internet of Things, cloud computing. So from mobile perspective, what are the main challenges you are facing in deploying these technologies to achieve your goals, having first-class service for your customers?
Thank you for the question. The challenge we have, I think Jawad taught the telecoms operator line better than I will. But the
So
challenge.
you agree or disagree?
I always agree with Jawad. It's a clever practice. One of the challenges that we have is we need to provide infrastructure for, especially in STC, especially in KSA, we need to provide infrastructure for a very, very large country with a population that is not as big as the country size, in the sense that we have disparate population. We have to make sure that we provide the connectivity for everyone in the country. When we're talking about spectrum is one of these topics that keeps coming up. When you are thinking about 3, 4, 5 times increase in demand over the space of a couple of weeks, when you're talking about demand in a very different pattern than what you used to have in the past. You had business districts covered. Suddenly you have to cover every single household to offer free services. You have to offer connectivity for the schooling platforms and e-health. So this challenge of ensuring that we can offer a ubiquitous service to the vast majority of the population, while at the same time we have the investment hurdles that are always coming up, either because of a spectrum of new technologies and so on and so forth. When we're talking specifically about IoT, when we're talking about cloud, the biggest challenge there is a bit different. We have on one hand the maturity of the actual clients, the maturity of the enterprise to adopt these technologies. And as we are all saying, the COVID-19 is helping a lot with the digital transformation and the realization by many, many companies that they can really benefit from technologies such as IoT or cloud. So for me, that's one of the biggest challenges when you're talking about IoT. The other one is, where do you find the skills? Where do you find the people with the right experience, with the right talent to drive those services? And this is not an STC challenge. This is an industry-wide challenge around the world. So these are the main topics that we are grappling with. And we're making lots of progress, but still lots to be done.
Exactly. You pointed here a very important point about the capacity development, and that I don't know, one of our speakers this morning, he said that we miss this capacity development. So I agree with you. But going back to make things more fruitful and more fun. So Jawad, Brahim disagree with you. What can be done further so he can agree with you?
Well, he mentioned that demand increased on fixed networks. absolutely where fixed networks were available. But in many countries, in the MENA region especially, mobile became the only option to get to e-learning or to get some online platform for the schooling. And I fully agree that the online platforms were, in many countries, were hastily developed and were not really up to par. So we now have, because of the pandemic, we now have situations where some schools are doing e-learning very well, where it's actually online video, the teacher interacts with the students, there's homework, there's questions and answers, and then there's the other option, such as the government schools in Jordan and Egypt and so on, where it's basically an on-demand kind of video without interaction. And it's really up to the student and their families to make sure that they're making the best out of it. Unfortunately, it's not working very well. In Jordan, up to 30% of students are not regularly connecting to the e-learning platform. But there were some bright spots. We've seen countries, Jordan and Saudi Arabia, where the government availed free spectrum to the operators because once you give the operators extra spectrum, they can increase their capacity without having to invest in extra towers and equipment. And that was to meet the extra demand needed for the pandemic. That was an excellent policy. We would recommend that any country that has excess spectrum that can be given to operators when needed means that you're not really pricing your spectrum well, because if the price was fair, all of the spectrum will have been bought by the operators. So if you have a surplus spectrum not available to the operators, you might want to revisit the pricing structure for the spectrum. But yes, I agree. In a country like the United Arab Emirates, where Abu Dhabi has 99% broadband penetration, of course, e-learning would probably not predominantly go over the fiber optics, not the mobile broadband, but that's not in many other countries where it's sparsely populated, where the fixed infrastructure is not as developed.
Yeah, if we want to talk about the bridging digital divide, so we need another whole day to discuss this, but thank you for bringing this out. Jihad, so we agree, all of us, that technology is important to lead the battle against COVID-19. Do you think that the technology advancement now can mitigate COVID-19 damages?
Yeah, very good question. Before we go into the mitigation, there's the prevention factor as well, and that's extremely important. And we know there's a big role for technology to play in preventing COVID-19 spread as well, from from the mobile devices to the proximity services to all those apps we've seen that if you've been in contact with anyone that has contracted COVID, so all those are there. Recently there was an MIT experimental announcement where they can, through AI, detect if you have, from your voice tone or from your coughing, if you have COVID or not, all the way to all the development and all the support from the AI side that is helping fast track the vaccine development. So the technology is definitely playing a major role there. Now, in the mitigation, we've discussed this a lot. I mean, a lot of technological tools are there, from video conferencing to online learning to all those type of services. So that I call the basic level. Now, there's the intermediate level, which is all the contactless services that are fast-tracked by technology and that can help to mitigate, to fight what COVID has done. So from e-payment to all the e-services to the online shopping, the e-commerce that is skyrocketing, and the delivery services, and to the third level, to the more advanced, if I may, and I think Yusuf and Brahim can talk more about this on the telehealth services, right? All the telehealth services that are really advancing and developing. And when I contracted COVID, by the way, recently, and I did an appointment online with the doctor. I mean, that's all new, right? That's all forced or fast-tracked by the...
How many days ago did you have it?
A lot of days. That was 6 weeks ago. So we're safe. No, I have antibiotics, so it goes both ways.
Salamat.
So so that's really, that's definitely. But I would like to make a comment, and I think Brahim alluded to this. It's beyond technology, and we always focus on the technology. At least in the UAE, I mean, if we don't talk about the digital divide, in the UAE, technology is there, right? it's more about the customer experience. So when we talk about the online learning, and this is how we can differentiate. Some school has really did it well, and some school you see parents suffering at home, right? They're suffering because what the teacher does is they send emails, as you said, or they send pre-recorded videos, and you see some school having something close to an immersive classroom experience, really. So you have a different experience from one household to another based on what their children are facing in school. Same thing again, I'd like always to bring it to the athletic world where fitness classes are happening. You see a lot of online courses and classes, Peloton, classes are really booming. Some others are not really that successful. So it's not always about technology. It's the customer perspective, customer experience, the journey that is really makes the difference.
Thank you, Jihad. So that gives us a
I have a comment. It's
Okay.
a topic.
Before going to Hazem,
it's a
please.
topic that's very key. It hasn't been discussed around data, because this cannot be all done. With all due respect to spectrum, wired, wireline, mobile, data today is a big issue and has been a big challenge. And it's been a bless what we've seen in the last few months around regulations being adapted very, very quickly to make sure that the public sector and the private sector can exchange data between them in the interest of the citizen. And it would have taken years for these regulations to be effective, although they are published in many countries in this region. But now, thankfully, to the pandemic, some of them were overlooked for a while, but then they were activated, and now they are in effect and even adjusted to the situation today. So that's the, I know Hazem is quite passionate about this as well.
Which is an excellent introduction. So I will ask Hazem, based on what Yusuf said, we know that the debate on data and privacy is booming now. So how we can ensure that data is using to benefit and not harm individuals?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these discussions around, data and merging private sector data sets with public sector data sets have been going on in different jurisdictions. It's no secret that in Dubai here, for example, the smart Dubai office has launched a private sector data strategy and also its policies about a year and a half or 2 years ago. And what's really important is when we're looking at this combination of public sector data sets and private sector data sets is in many cases going with bilateral agreements is not really the way to go. Because oftentimes as a mobile operator or as a master developer or even as an airline company or even a car ride sharing company, the data that you really need doesn't necessarily sit with another party that is also interested in your data. And this led to the creation of citywide or nationwide data exchanges, and especially in the region where we have actually government is viewed as a trusted broker, that allows us in a way, while respecting privacy, analyzing the data, making sure that if I'm, as a citizen, going to have my data used, I have the option to opt out or even to get part of that monetization. We are in a position right now, and when I say we, I mean the telecom industry, because at the end of the day, mobile data sets are among the most valuable dynamic data sets that a lot of these use cases will eventually want to rely on. So with that in mind, and what was mentioned before about COVID having accelerated this collaboration, because if we're trying to do analytics or contact tracing and all of that, we need to know how people are moving, where they're going, and so forth. So, I see this as a great opportunity to accelerate a lot of this collaboration, rethink some of the policies and the regulations around that, so that we can really finally get into these new collaborative models. And that's not going to only be around data, but also some of the classic regulation about, and the classic business models that an operator is going to have to invest in the infrastructure, put all their networks, and it's only after they've deployed all this infrastructure that they're going to recover their costs. Why not start promoting, 5G with the healthcare industry and all the other industries, basically, that will eventually benefit from this connectivity, so that the discussions with the regulators about spectrum costs and all of that is a lot better informed, with connectivity being a social good and a public good, not really something that is viewed as a pure investment.
I will take 5 more minutes, if I can, Tony, because time is out, but I like to quote, bilateral agreements are not the way to go. Yusuf, I will give you 1 minute. Do you think we need new international standardization or new policy regulation?
Depends where, depends on the maturity of those regulations. But in our region, I believe the big countries have adequate regulations. I think the secret sauce is activating, enforcing, compliance rather than new. Short answer.
Thank you so much. So I'll go to Brahim for 1 minute too. My question is, what are the gaps or the bottlenecks, or we see the risks in this digital transformation that organizations should take?
I think, sorry, I'm not going to answer that question, because I will just comment on the data for good, to be honest, because I think I'm 100% that the issue is not bilateral.
We have another session on data. Please go ahead.
It's 6 a.m. my time. Okay. I'm looking forward to my breakfast.
Go ahead.
But I have to be honest. The biggest challenge is not the regulations. It's the way we do regulations. So it's a very different market. So I'm not going to say I agree or disagree with Canada, the notion of privacy. So we have anonymized data, what we call for good for research, and it's tell us that we launched the program that we provide for free. But I think the issue is we need these to do things differently. So there's like 7 million standards bodies. I think we need to get accelerated. We need to get agile. And sadly, our politicians in Canada and in the US have been using data in a very bad way, and depending on the results, they mislabeled it. So they're giving that technology and what Yusuf said, the use of AI and what we need to do to get better outcomes, a very bad name. So and it's only the politicians that give a shit. Like you got these kids saying, oh, my father had cancer and his treatment's going very well. And some politician 10,000 kilometers away, oh my God, they violated the guy's privacy. Well, his daughter just posted that stupid thing online. So I think there's a fundamental mismatch between the regulators, people like us, I'm a dinosaur myself, I'm old enough, and actually how people perceive their own data. And I'm going to shut up now, I don't overdo, but it goes back to Jihad's point. Fundamentally, we're not client-centric. Like the biggest issue with online medical, you know what the issue with online, we launched multiple platforms that tell us, was if you visit the doctor, they can charge the government $45. If they do an online consult, it's $17. So what do you think was the main motivator? So there's a whole bunch of adjacencies that need to be dealt with globally.
Brahim,
sorry, and I overstepped, and I did not disagree with Joanne now.
So it's a very complicated discussion and a long discussion here, but I believe each one of us in the tech industry has a role to play. So before my last comment and before I give the last word to Dimitris, what you can say as a final message on how the technology advancement can fight COVID-19 or can help in situations like this?
Yes. What I have to say, first of all, is that I'm really proud about the telecoms industry, because pretty much everywhere around the world, telecoms operators stepped up and really helped address the crisis. So I think this is something that proved on one hand the willingness, on the other hand, how useful and how necessary the service of the telecoms operators is. Now, cooperation for me is the key. There is cooperation that is at the creation of ecosystems with multiple players, from government all the way to the startup ecosystem. And I think by working together, by ensuring that the creative ideas not only stay on the drawing board, but are pushed out into the market and into society, into the economy, we can have much higher impact.
Yusuf,
I was
30
just,
seconds.
Brahim, on the fact of data sharing. Yesterday, doctors and nurses in the US issued an official letter to President Trump to actually release the health data for COVID-19 to allow President Biden to actually act on it. Can you believe this? I mean, we're talking about our market and our regulations, and in such a pandemic, it's really bad to see that data can be monopolized and kept for the sake of, for political reasons. So I think we're in a better place here, thankfully, to the leadership of this region.
I agree with you, and to conclude on a positive point, we can upload the performance of the mobile operator network and the internet. They did well, they kept connected people. So thank you guys very much. Thank you for being with us. I believe we had 5 minutes.
What's for breakfast, Brahim?
Let's do a group photo.